Welcome to episode 5 of Let's Talk WEM, the podcast series from CIWEM, which keeps you right up to date with current issues in the world of water and environmental management, talks to the key figures across our industry, and takes a deep dive into some of the biggest challenges and topics we're all facing at the moment. We're really grateful to our series sponsor, Yorkshire Water, for helping us share these conversations and bring this podcast idea to life. I'm Niki Roach. I'm the president of CIWEM, and the theme of my presidency is Everything is Connected. For regular listeners to the pod, and if you're one of them, thank you, you'll know that themes such as the power of storytelling and of individual connections that we make have come out in each episode so far. In our last episode, touching on resilience to flooding, I was really struck by the power of our differences. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean hearing how Aotearoa and the UK approach the health of rivers. There are obvious similarities, but the differences are where I think some of the beauty and opportunity is to really learn and for everyone to raise the bar. And so I'm looking forward to exploring that a little bit more today with this episode on water, sanitation and hygiene, or WASH for short. And joining me to share his opinions and expert analysis is my guest co-host, Neil Dewis, Director of Service Delivery from Yorkshire Water here in the north of England. Welcome, Neil. It's great to have you.
Hi, Nikki. Really lovely to catch up with you, and I'm really looking forward to having a chat about things we might have in common.
Yeah, me too. So let's do a quick intro to you first. Neil's got full accountability for the delivery of water to the Yorkshire region, and he's previously held roles in business transformation, regulation and strategy and customer service. As a fellow of CIWEM, Neil is passionate about the environment and in particular sustainable landscape management. And he's also a member of the Water Supply and Water Quality CIWEM Technical Panel. He's a director of the rural regeneration company Pennine Prospects and is the chair of WaterAid in Yorkshire. And as my co-host for today's episode, Neil and I are going to listen to our guest interview together, and then we'll discuss his reflections in the context of working in the water sector in the UK. Our guest interview in this episode takes us to Kathmandu in Nepal, where we'll hear from Tripti Rai, who's the country director of WaterAid in Nepal. I spoke to Tripti a few days ago to find out more about the work of WaterAid there, and also the very direct links with another UK-based water company, Anglian Water, through an initiative called the Beacon Project. I was particularly interested to hear about some of the challenges of this type of project.
So many people still don't have access to safe drinking water. So many people would still be struggling to make sure that, their toilets are functional, that there is access to basic provisions like water and soap to make sure that you can wash your hands. We have to continue to raise a voice to make sure that water sanitation hygiene is prioritized, not just in the domestic use, but also look at healthcare facilities.
So Neil, before we hear about the work of WaterAid in Nepal, I know Yorkshire Water are involved with WaterAid in Ethiopia. Can you just tell me a little bit more about the work that you've been doing?
Well, we've had a long-standing relationship with WaterAid in Yorkshire, and it was really for us up until 5 years ago. It was about fundraising, and that was fantastic, and we had loads of great energy and volunteers within the company. But around 5 years ago, we set out a commitment to raise 1 million during that 5-year period. And we really wanted to move the relationship from being just volunteering to something more sustainable. So we put that money towards a specific country, which was Ethiopia. And it led to the development of what's called the 20 Towns Partnership. And that's where 20 towns within Ethiopia have all been looking to develop their sanitation and hygiene programs. And what we brought to that was that we sent some people over. That was frontline operatives, so scientists, field technicians, who went over, shared their knowledge and left a lasting impression. And some of the benefits were amazing in terms of technical knowledge development, setting up maintenance stores and equipment, and really embedding the sort of water quality and hygiene standards that are very well developed in the UK. And we're just now looking for the next 5 years about how we sponsor a second phase of it. And I'd really like to develop that and make it more formal. Gain the benefits for Yorkshire Water employees as well, because I think what we've learnt is people tend to go, share their knowledge, and then it ends there. So we're talking about how we can establish a better framework to keep that knowledge sharing going.
I think you'll really enjoy the interview we're about to hear in that case then. So let's get into it. I'm really pleased to be joined by my guest today, Tripti Rai. Tripti is a practitioner with substantial experience in the development sector, and currently she's the country director of WaterAid in Nepal. And for those of you that don't know who WaterAid are, well, we'll find out more during our interview now, but WaterAid are committed to promoting water and sanitation and hygiene education and making sure that nobody is left behind. So Tripti, it's really lovely to have you with us this morning.
Hello, good morning and namaste, Niki. Very happy to be here and speaking to you this afternoon. Afternoon in Nepal, morning in the UK.
Of course, namaste. Yeah, exactly. And I can see through Tripti's window a very sunny Kathmandu in the background, and she's seen a very sunny Leeds through my window as well. So truly international podcast this morning. Tripti, I've never been to Nepal and I know very little about the water and sanitation and hygiene context there. So can you start by giving us a feel for what the landscape of water and sanitation is like in Nepal at the moment, please?
Yeah, thank you, Niki. I'm very happy to be able to take you virtually through a podcast to Nepal. In Nepal, we are not a very big country, so it's a landlocked country with Himalayas right at the north, and we've got a lot of natural resources, the forests and the rivers, that make up the picturesque, side of the country as well. But while being quite, small geographically, it's got a complexity of geographical terrains. So at present, where we sit in the WASH context is we still have more than 3 million people who don't have access to safe drinking water. We still have more than 9.3 million people without basic water services, like, where you have a tap close to your home or in your home where you can access drinking water or for domestic use. And across the country, while there has been investment to build water supply systems, we still see that it's not really fully functional in terms of being able to supply, for example, water for 24/7. We see that intermittent supply of water in Nepal in most parts of the country. So that does make it quite difficult in terms of ensuring that people have the well-being which is associated with actually having access to safe water available at all times.
Thanks, Tripti. That's so helpful. So now we understand a little bit of the landscape. Can you give me a sense of the work that you're doing with WaterAid in Nepal?
So WaterAid in Nepal, we've been working here for over 30 years. And what we'd like to say is we are here for the long haul. We have a very strong and long-term commitment to ensure that everyone everywhere has access to safe water, sanitation and hygiene. And that is what we also commit in terms of working in Nepal. We work with a lot of local organizations. We also work with communities very closely. And at the same time, we collaborate and provide technical support to institutions, including of the government. So we have been very active in terms of providing policy analysis and support at various levels of the government, as well as, working with civil society organizations. Alongside, we've also been working to ensure that we demonstrate good technical provisions where we can, sort of demonstrate sustainable water supply schemes, work on sanitation, including behavior change, because sanitation is not just about infrastructure, it's also about behavior change in the long term for people to be able to benefit from the good hygiene practice. And over time, we have helped, reach many communities with safe water in their homes, contributed to open defecation free in the country, in Nepal, where Nepal was declared open defecation free in 2019 by the government. We've also collaborated extensively with institutions of the government to promote hygiene behavior change, where we are working at a very large scale to provide, support to ensure that young mothers of children below the age of 1 year are well equipped to look after their children when they're coming for vaccination, and they're sort of supported with the importance of good hygiene behaviors when looking after your baby.
So what role does WaterAid play in Nepal in terms of advocating for those systemic changes? What does that look like in your case at the moment in terms of advocacy?
Yeah, so as I said at the beginning, policy advocacy has always been one of our key areas of work, where we look at policy gaps, for example, or maybe also helping implement policies that are already there. We also have really looked at how do we build on some of these key global frameworks to galvanize action and prioritize water sanitation hygiene. So one of the key areas that I feel has always been important, at least for our work in Nepal, is drawing on the rights to water and sanitation at a global level, where in 2010, the UN recognized the right to water and sanitation as quite crucial, and it has progressively, been promoted and people are understanding more about it. So that we anchor on as a key global commitment. Following that, Nepal has also signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals commitment as one of the countries. So we have been very much advocating as well as providing that technical support so we can understand what those goals mean for Nepal and how those targets are realized at a local and national level. So we continue to put our efforts to understand that, to provide the capacity building support, and also demonstrate some of that work in Nepal. And that's exactly what we are doing in a particular local government or municipality in Nepal, where we have something called the Beacon Project, which was inspired by looking at how do we take forward the SDG 6 goal and vision and make it real for communities in Lahan, where we work.
Well, that's a beautiful segue into the Beacon Project. So SDG 6 is water, and I'm really keen to hear about what Beacon's all about from you. So can you tell me a little bit about the Beacon Project?
Yes, I'm very much happy and excited to be able to talk about the Beacon Project. The name itself is inspired by, how do we work in a particular area, starting something with the SDGs, inspiration in one of the areas in Nepal, and build that in such a way that we demonstrate an example or set up an example of how we could deliver sustainable water sanitation and hygiene for communities living in Lahan, and to make sure that no one is left behind. Because it's very important for us as WaterAid as well to ensure that the marginalized, vulnerable communities are not left behind, and that they understand and are aware of their right to water and sanitation. And we also help in that process for them to access those services. So we set up that project with the support of our colleagues in WaterAid UK, because we have our head offices in WaterAid UK and WaterAid Nepal. We are part of the global organization. In that process, WaterAid, we had the opportunity to work with Anglian Water and its alliances. And what brought us together, I think, was a common vision. For WaterAid, it's really about reaching the most marginalized and poorest communities with safe water sanitation. In that process, help build the institutional capacity of different agencies working in that local community. And with Anglian Water, of course, having extensive experience and being one of the key industries in the UK, the Sustainable Development Goals and the partnerships to find different ways of collaborating to be able to contribute to getting water to everybody was, I think, something that helped us come together. And that's how we've started the Beacon Project.
We're really grateful to our sponsor, Yorkshire Water, for making it possible to bring you this podcast series. If your organisation would like to find out more about sponsoring future episodes or series of Let's Talk WEM, just go to letstalkwem.ciwem.org to get all the information you need. Certainly in my experience of WaterAid, and I've been really fortunate to see a little bit of its work on the ground in a couple of countries, what I'm really struck by is that WaterAid are often the facilitator of work. They'll use a local organisation, a local partner, community groups to deliver solutions. But what they do is broker those skills and help support build that capacity. So if that's already working, why do you need Anglian Water?
In terms of the partnership with Anglian Water, at least from the Nepal team, Our key attraction was really working with experts who have a certain expertise in another part of the world, but we could definitely learn and contextualize that in our context. So we become better, we are stronger, our role as a technical capacity and, like you said, a facilitator becomes even more sharper, because you don't necessarily have to have all the skills right now. You could have, something that you can get from somewhere, and you can facilitate that in such a way that it is context specific and valued. Alongside, I think the support is always necessary, because where we see in the WASH context right now, you will still see that with the SDG commitments, there's still a huge financing gap for the WASH sector. In Nepal, we see it's more than 50% of a financing gap as needed, right? And while the government is generating its resources, maybe internally, or there may be lots of big other donors investing in different infrastructure and stuff, there is still a need for organizations like us, and of course with the valuable support of Anglian Water and alliances, the support that they provide us actually helps us do a lot of innovative work to demonstrate how it can be done differently. So I think both in terms of providing support, in terms of raising funds or raising awareness, and also now actually collaborating in such a way that we work like a team. We're not like a supporter or a donor and, another WaterAid. But now we've made a multidisciplinary, I think, global team who's working together to deliver a common vision in Lahan through the beacon.
So it sounds like it's working really well, but the world is not perfect, as we know. Where are the real challenges for you at the moment, Tripti, with the Beacon project in particular, but I guess more broadly, WaterAid's work in Nepal?
So on the Beacon project, let me tell you about what we've learned. So I said that, the collaboration, we are kind of 3 years into the collaboration. So one of the challenges we faced, early on with the Beacon project is really agreeing on timelines for deliverables. So it was something quite new for us as well in terms of how we've designed the Beacon project in Nepal, the kind of outputs that we have been, sort of looking at, the targets. Working with the utility was quite fairly new for us, because we've been working mainly with, water user committees in the past, which are community-led. So we had some challenges in terms of understanding Anglian Water's expectation, Anglian Water understanding what the Nepal context, and then being able to then recalibrate our expectations of timelines and how fast and quick we deliver on the ground. Though, of course, I think the intention for all of us is we are able to reach people with safe water ASAP. It should be done yesterday. No one should be deprived of safe drinking water, but it does take time because we have to work through processes, through institutions, like you said, behavior change, very important. The other bit has been around, how do we make sure that our local stakeholders actually own and lead these ideas. We do want to see that this vision is led by our, local counterparts, because that is one way to a sustainable future. So that has taken time and investment to, engage, support, to advocate. And I think we are kind of there. We see a lot of good relationship building now and ownership of what we call the One Plan, which is the Beacon's delivery plan. And everybody has a contribution there. So I guess it's not been easy, but then I think over time, because this is not something easy, we all knew that this is a different model, a unique model. We want to set up and demonstrate something inspiring and innovative. And we have now, I think come to a point where we all understand each other's weaknesses and also strengths, and have found a way to make a greater impact in Lahan.
So, Tripti, you started off by telling us, some really quite stark numbers, 3 million people without access to adequate water, 9.3 million without access to basic water services. Could you give me a sense at a high level of what the future looks like for WaterAid and your partners in Nepal?
Yes, you ask a very important question because globally too, as WaterAid, we are trying to rethink how we can add more significant value and what kind of role we as an organization can play to address the different challenges that perhaps, now are in front of us because it is a changing world. There are lots of disruptions we've seen just in 2020. How do we reposition ourselves? Do we need to do more of something, less of something? Do we need to do something differently? So in Nepal too, we are in this process now of reflecting on how do we build on our good practice and the good results that we have been able to learn from and see that there is impact, positive impact in people's lives. At the same time, we are very aware that there are big challenges like, water security and climate change, which everybody in the whole world is talking about, and it's also a real challenge in Nepal. Nepal is also quite susceptible to lots of natural disasters. We had massive earthquakes in 2015, I think, and now we are seeing a global pandemic which is affecting the whole world. So I think in that context, we still feel that while the big challenges and issues are there, what remains still very, very important and relevant is the fact that, like you said, so many people still don't have access to safe drinking water. So many people would still be struggling to make sure that, their toilets are functional, like you said, that there is access, again, to, these services that are functional, that while you are being made aware and you are conscious of your hygiene behaviors, that there is access to basic provisions like water and soap to make sure that you can wash your hands. So those still make us very relevant, and we feel that we have to continue to raise our voice to make sure that water sanitation hygiene is prioritized, not just as water sanitation hygiene in the domestic use, but also look at healthcare facilities. There, the situation is again, quite challenging because not all healthcare facilities would have good wash facilities, for example. Also in education, you still see that young girls don't often go to school when they have their periods because the school may not have a proper toilet. There may be lack of water. And if you are an adolescent girl who has her periods, then it'll be quite difficult to stay in school the whole day. So I think these things are still things that matter. And we will continue to see how we can advocate for certain policy changes, also help build the capacity where it's needed of institutions. And at the same time, like with Beacon, demonstrate how we can do it in a sustainable way in collaboration with different partners so that there is long-term provision of water sanitation for communities.
Thank you, Tripti. I think you've given us a masterclass in show, don't tell in terms of the Beacon project and really demonstrating what's possible, but then not taking your eyes off that bigger ultimate aim of lifting everybody out of poverty. Unfortunately, our time is drawing to a close, but before I let you go and enjoy your evening in Kathmandu, something that I ask all of my guests is to think about how the topic that we've been talking about is connected to the next topic that I'm leaping to. And our final episode in this series is all about demand reduction. So reducing the demand for water, something that we're talking about in the UK. We've got a target of reducing abstractions by 50% by 2050. Are there any links that you can draw from what we've talked about today and your work in Nepal to that demand reduction initiative that we've got?
Yeah, I think, one of the things I've always felt and also trying to learn more about is when we're looking at water, we take water as always there. We take it for granted. But it's not an infinite resource. It's a finite resource, and it's really up to us as people to make sure that we are managing it well, that we value water. I think that's very much in line with the theme of World Water Day this year, isn't it? Valuing water. And while we're working with communities, we are working, at a very small scale to make sure that people realize the value of water, that we're not wasting it. At the same time, how do we, when water is so precious, how do people then use it? What kind of water do you use to drink? What kind of water would you use to flush? I think those are things quite relevant for us. And maybe those are areas we can all collaboratively talk about and see how we can make sure that our water resources are also protected protected, that there is recharge of water. And in places where there is surplus water, how we can consume less so people elsewhere could maybe benefit from it. Because I believe that everything is connected, as you do. And I feel every time we are creating a balance, we are helping, balance something else. So I feel that it's a very relevant topic. And maybe some other day, I'll tell you about how we are working on water security. And we've done some, projects around how do you recharge groundwater. So yeah, those are topics that we can continue whenever we speak.
Well, that sounds fantastic. I'd love that. That sounds wonderful. Thank you. I couldn't agree more. Whilst the context is always locally specific, the themes are universal, aren't they? And I think you've given us a beautiful example of that today. Tripti, thank you so much for making the time to talk to us. It was wonderful to meet you, and I look forward to our future conversations.
Thank you, Niki. Thank you for having me here. And I hope that listeners will helpfully learn from what we've done and also give us any feedback. We're always happy to work together.
Okay, so Neil, what are your initial reflections on the interview?
I thought that was really interesting to hear from Tripti. I think what was clear was that the fundraising has been really strong with the Anglian example. The parallels, though, were very similar things in terms of the technical knowledge that's been left on the ground there, the development then that has come from it. And I think if it's probably anything like our experience, the really important thing for us was what people brought back when they'd been and had that experience. We work in a regional monopoly. We don't have the non-regulated businesses that we perhaps used to have. So for people joining the company now who want to experience travel, who want to experience, a different way of working, I think these opportunities just provide a great opportunity to do that.
I'm interested in, we talk about sharing skills, and obviously your colleagues, and I'm sure it's the same with Anglian, felt like they were able to impart their skills in the communities that they worked with. Is there a skill share in return back into Yorkshire?
Yeah, I think that occurred on many levels. It wasn't a case of managerial staff heading over and perhaps the visits are a handshake and a show around. It was very much on the ground working. So for some of my colleagues to go out and have to really realise that the amount of knowledge that they had, really setting up in some new environments, because some of these systems, brand new networks that had been set up, they had all of the infrastructure to go with it that you might expect. And it was really useful for them to share perhaps processes and procedures that sit on a shelf and are documented here and people have learned to live with, over a 10, 15-year career. Yeah, to really go back and understand that and think about applying it from first principles. The same business, but in a totally different environment. People definitely brought a lot back from that.
I would imagine working on a brand new distribution system would be quite novel, actually, having spent a lot of time working on ones that are far from new in the UK, actually, often.
Well, I think that's it. We're dealing with systems that are 150 years old, have been modified to go through an industrial revolution, a residential kind of change in the environment, and now, of course, more of the environmental challenges that we see associated with either flooding or kind of drier periods. So yes, definitely going back and having a system that's designed from first principles. I mean, they're seeing people that are perhaps dealing with unaccounted for water or non-revenue water in the sort of below 10% region. Now, obviously coming back and looking at our system where it's nearer 20% because of the legacy assets, really opens people's eyes. And I think the other thing there was that because it's done from first principles and because ensuring that all of the water can be accounted for, slightly more precious commodity value there, meant that some of the metering strategies were more advanced than perhaps we have in the UK. So again, it gave people a real insight and the ability to come back and think about what we could apply in our business to improve our position on that.
We started this pod by talking about some of the similarities and differences between our approaches to WASH internationally. And I was particularly struck by Tripti talking about vulnerability and ensuring vulnerable communities have access to services. When she talked about stuff that thankfully I've never had to think about, like not being able to go to school because I've got my period, for example, like that, it can feel really quite removed, I think, in the UK context. So I'm wondering, are there any parallels that you can draw between the work that Beacon's doing for people in Lahan and the work that Yorkshire Water's doing for communities in Yorkshire?
I think we're really recognising that the role we've got to play in our community. You can see that in some of the work we've done with Living with Water over in Hull. We've done a similar thing at the moment. We're looking at a different approach to catchment management in the North Yorkshire area. And again, there's an opportunity there because we need to get some telecommunications into an area, so we need to work with landowners to get them in. And rather than perhaps coming at it so we're coming in and we're just going to put the communications in, we've worked with local communities to see what benefits there might be for them in terms of providing a rural broadband into that area. So again, I think these things just make you start to come up problems with a more of an open mind, more of a creative mind, rather than perhaps the traditional engineered solutions we may have thought of.
I feel like I am collecting Everything is Connected case studies throughout the course of this podcast inadvertently, and it's wonderful to hear. It's when we lift our eyes up, it's extraordinary, isn't it, the other things that we might start to see. But I think it often takes big organisations like water companies to be the catalyst for some of that, because for smaller NGOs and organisations it can be hard, can't it, to have that influence beyond your core operation, I think. So we've talked a little bit about what you've been doing in Yorkshire, and we've talked about Ethiopia. So are you looking further afield as a water company to share expertise, not necessarily through WaterAid projects, but more generally, and bring learning from other countries perhaps into the operations that you do?
Definitely. I was lucky enough to take a business transformation role a couple of years ago, and part of the brief there was to really lift your head up, which is difficult to do, particularly when you're in a day-to-day operational role. And through that, we reached out to Harvard, where we did some work on sort of open networks and collaborative spaces, and really thinking very differently about that. So again, not just looking at your internal resource to solve the problem, but reaching out and just bringing different mindsets, people who solve problems in their own industry, bringing them into ours and sharing and seeing what learning we can get from that. We've got a big problem in this AMP, a leakage and water efficiency and mains repair challenge. And when we came to look at that, if we tackled it from a traditional approach, it wouldn't have solved the problem. We needed to look further afield, and we were fortunate that the Department for International Trade wanted to put together a visit to Singapore to go and talk to a number of partners out there and just share learning. Singapore has very, very different challenges. I'm very lucky that, I can see my 25-year plan and know my supply demand. Whereas in Singapore, both with climate and population growth, potentially could have been a shortage of water. So they've looked at desalination, but also excitingly sort of using recycled water, which I think is a very fascinating area to get into, and just disconnecting that all water has to be for potable sources. If you can segregate and have water that's for agricultural and industrial uses that may not be to the potable standard, but then overlaid on top of that you've got the pure potable water, gets you thinking, do we just continue to live with the system we've got, the 150-year-old system, or are we at the precipice now with climate change where we have to think about doing things very differently?
Well, that's a beautiful segue, given that our time is running short. As you know, we always try and make a link between our topic and the next one. And the next conversation we're about to have is around reducing the demand for water. So is there a direct link?
Yeah, well, as part of that visit, we asked the question around smart metering. The Department for International Trade were able to set up a visit to Manila Water Services. They had to move to a smart metering solution. So we were able to go and see that and understand the difficulties of implementation, but also the benefits then of, again, being able to very accurately understand demand, behaviour, because they were getting this incredibly regular data. And that leads us really to clearly where we need to go next, a world where we want everyone to have choice and use as much as they want, versus looking and saying, well, is it right that we use 130 litres per head per day, and should we be through engineering solutions or behaviour moving to a world where we're down more at 80 or 90 litres, and which solutions are going to get us there in the most sustainable manner?
Join us for our final episode, I can't believe it, in the series, and that'll be out soon. I'll be interviewing a panel of demand reduction experts. We've got Nikki Russell, who's the MD of Waterwise, Rob Lawson, the chair of the CIWEM Water Resources Panel, and Andrew Tucker, who's Thames Water's Water Efficiency Manager. And my guest co-host is Sophie Broadfield, who's Deputy Director of Water Services at the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, for the UK Government. So don't forget to subscribe to the pod on your favourite podcast player so you don't miss an episode. And all it leaves me to say is a huge thank you to my guest today, Tripti Rai, and my wonderful co-host, Neil Dewis. Thank you, Neil.
My pleasure. Lovely to talk to you, Nikki.
So that's it, everyone. Stay safe and we'll see you next time.
Let's Talk WEM is produced by Bwlb. Bwlb Bwlb. The best ideas, the strongest content.